If you're still making QR codes that look like, there's a much better way of doing this.
I built bots before they were cool.
This prompt exists in the pinned comments below this video. QR codes have been with us for a while. They originated in the 1990s to track automotive parts in Japan. By the early 2000s, they received ISO certification and became a global standard. It wasn't until about 2020, in the event of COVID, before QR codes reached any kind of tipping point. Now you see QR codes everywhere. The way I like to use them is basically as printed hyperlinks. I also keep one on my business card. So let's talk about this QR code that we opened the video with. You can generate these very easily with any Chrome browser. The only limitations are that you end up with their branding in the middle of the QR code. And while I appreciate that they make this service available, I personally don't want their brand on my QR codes. So in place of their brand, I substitute my brand in the middle of the QR code. The other issue that I have with QR codes is that when you're using more than one of them, they all look alike, and it's hard to tell one from another. So I started doing QR codes a little differently. Branding and labeling are as you may have guessed, we're going to use ChatGPT to do this. Now, I have found that this really only works with ChatGPT, and it does not work with the other models. And here's why. Images are generally done with diffusion models, and diffusion models are very different than language models. While language models are focused on the probability of text appearing, diffusion models do the same thing with patterns in images. And the way they determine where those patterns are is by playing with noise filters. So what happens when a diffusion model wants to render something very specific, like a QR code or text is probably a better example, you'll get something that looks like text, but it may or may not be readable. I found the same thing happening with the current chatbots. You will get something that is more like a diffusion model, whereas ChatGPT uses a multimodal image processor that uses both the diffusion models, and it also superimposes other information. And that is why you're able to create QR codes with ChatGPT and not with Claude or some of the others that I've tried. So here's some cocktail party knowledge about QR codes. So the QR codes are made up of 3 registration marks. These tell the reader if the label is twisted or flipped or upside down or something like that. The other registration mark is right here, and these are called contour marks. And these are used in case the label is on something that's not flat, like a can or possibly a sphere. It's able to figure that all out just by looking at these marks. You'll notice when there's more data, it becomes more critical, and there are more marks. So this 2x4 pattern right here represents the first byte in the QR code. And then they go up, and they come back down, and they go back up. Again, when there's more data, there's more squares. All right, so let's look at this prompt. As you would probably guess, we're using a structured prompt here, but we're using one a little bit differently here. We're actually passing variables to it. Here's how this is done. So here's our basic definition of the QR code that we're creating. We define the text elements, including the positioning and the fonts. We do the same thing for the label, and then there's some rules, and there's a lot of error decoding. You can have a QR code that's only like 66% readable, and it's still a valid QR code. And we want it to come out as a PNG. Now you'll notice what's really different here is that we're using variables. So in other words, we've got a tag here called branding. We've got a tag here called URL. And there's another one down here called label. The way these are used is in the actual prompt, we'll do something like this. We'll upload our JSON file, and we'll say, please create a scannable QR code as described below. Use the attached JSON file as the sole authority. Apply these substitutions exactly, and this is how you do your variable substitution. URL is your URL, your text for brand, and then your text for label. Use the protocol HTTPS or HTTP because that determines how the QR code is going to be used. For example, QR codes can be used for all kinds of things. They can take you to an email interface that's preloaded. They could load a specific app. In this case, we're converting the QR code to a URL and loading it in a browser. But there are many other things you can do with QR codes. Now, there are some downsides of creating QR codes like this. Anytime you put something in the middle, there's a quiet space space that you can reserve for that, but it's pretty small. I wouldn't recommend doing anything much larger than what you see here in the example. I used to do QR codes where I would put the label in the middle as well, but I found that there's just not enough room in space. So that's pretty much it. It's the real important lesson in this is that you can create a JSON template and pass variables to it, which makes a prompt like this ultimately reusable. So what are you going to do with your QR code? Could you make a QR code that likes and subscribes this video? I bet you can.